we're live?
We're live.
Okay.
Not by the time
Okay.
she
You need to say hi to the camera.
Yes, everyone stand up and say hi to the camera.
Hello.
Yo, Bishop, come over a little bit. Yes.
Hello.
Okay, thank you. Here and I have to present myself as well. And all right. Now, okay, you can go, babe.
All right. Now, some of you may be wondering exactly what this strange contraption on the table here is. It is commonly referred to as airbrush. It has many uses, but today I will be outlining the step-by-step process one uses the airbrush to paint a large miniature. Now, the alternative to an airbrush that most people think of is a spray can. The problem with that is that, like in Houston, it's either too hot or too humid, and the spray can, on a large surface area, doesn't really matter, but on a small surface with a lot of detail, it'll clog detail, fuzz up, do really strange things. So, on to the step-by-step process. First, you need to make sure that you have an airbrush and a compressor right here. The compressor is what shoots the air that allows the paint to go onto the model. Now, the great thing about an airbrush is that you can put any color of any paint pushed through it. And there's also something called a primer that we start out with. So the first step is spraying on a primer. So to start the priming process, first, like any device, you need to turn it on. And it's quite loud when it's actually plugged in, so I haven't plugged it in. But it has a very convenient button here. And there is a pounds per square inch pressure meter on what pressure the air is set to. And depending on the pressure, you can get different effects with the airbrush. But first, you always start out at the lowest pressure, test that out with the paint you're using, and see how that works. And then you adjust the pressure, you ramp it up until you get, a nice even spray. And that can vary depending on the altitude and barometric pressure of where you're living. So that there's no general rule of thumb. But here is step one, priming. This is a fully primed miniature where I have airbrushed on all the surfaces, all the different angles, a primer onto this metal surface. Without the primer, the paint will just slide right off, and it'll just goop into weird places, and it will not make a clean surface. So we need something to base it off of. Then we use what is called base coating, where we lay the main colors that we want to airbrush. Now, this is a relatively large miniature, and the reason we're using an airbrush is because most painting that we do is with this size model, just one of these guys. The difference is quite stark. And so the techniques on this, when applied to something this size, takes much longer. It's more tedious. And with the airbrush, if I did it with a conventional brush, this would have taken me a good half hour. With the airbrush, I did this in like 3 minutes. Now, once you got the base coat down, then you can start doing some specialized effects. Like here, I have a very nice effect that I've done on a large scale, just so that you can see it. This is where you can make a three-dimensional gradient on a flat surface, so it appears to be textured. And you cannot do this without thousands of strokes with a regular brush and many hours, where this took me a minute to do. Another great thing about the airbrush is that it has variable spray patterns. Spray can, one spray pattern, that's it. One intensity, one layer, one width of spray. Here, all the same airbrush, same paint, but I used I used a different spray pattern. And you say there's small, kind of medium strokes, and then even this very large stroke. And so depending on the size of the area you're going onto, you're going to use a different width. And that is controlled by this trigger right here. So you press, this is a double action brush, meaning that one action is you press to get your air, and then the other action is to pull back, and the further you pull back, the wider the spray you'll get. So you can adjust it according to what is needed. Now, I've been using an airbrush for quite a while, and many people, when talking about painting miniatures, don't really view it as an important part of your tool set. But me, I find it an invaluable tool. You can get really good effects very easily in a short amount of time. And I think anyone interested in the miniature painting hobby, when you get larger models than just the small type, you should really consider using an airbrush. Thank you. So questions and answers. Yes?
You called it a large miniature. Isn't that an oxymoron?
It is. It's a large for a miniature. Because like I said, here is a standard troop type, and it's 28 millimeter scale. And then this is proportionally, it is quite large. It is quite large compared to this guy. It is still even smaller than the standard action figure you'd give to your kid. But when you think of miniatures, we're usually thinking about these guys. But every once in a while, you come across something like this. So conventional painting isn't as effective. Yes.
Do you use the airbrush on the large miniatures for just the base coats and whatnot, or how does it work if you're trying to do details, full details?
Well, another great thing about airbrushes is depending on which airbrush you use, you can actually get different parts to create different effects. The needle I have in here is just an all-around regular needle, which can go from a pencil thin line to like the width of a pencil to the 1.5-inch spray. But you can get even smaller needles that can get to super small detail. Now, the smallest that it will not do, that you'll still have to do with the brush, are like this guy's face. When you want to highlight the cheekbones and pick out the eyes, you're still going to have to use a conventional brush. The airbrush will never completely replace the standard brush, but it definitely can get rid of a lot of the tedious block work that normally you'd have to go through with a standard brush.
So where would you get an airbrush if you wanted to do miniature work?
Well,
The needles for them.
Well, the great thing about it is that just about everything you can get online. You can also go to your local Hobby Lobby or Michael's. They have different airbrushes there. My personal opinion is go to your local store, see what you like, but don't buy it there because there's always a markup at the stores. So what I would do is I'd look at it, see the different options that there are to buy, and then use that as your guideline as you're searching on the internet. Because if you just start your search, it'll be a lot harder, but you'll have a much narrower view of what you want if you've actually seen it. So, I got mine online.
How much do they usually cost? Like what price range?
The airbrush or the compressor? Well, airbrushing can be used for everything from applying makeup to painting like bicycle helmets and things. And so there's a wide variety of airbrushes and compressors available. The compressors usually range from anywhere from $40 to $1,000, depending on what you want to do. Movie artists who do like the fancy backdrops in like Lord of the Rings and stuff like that, they'll use a very fancy $1,000 compressor and about a $600 airbrush to get all that fine detail work. But for what the average user will use, I'd say about $100 for a compressor and about another $100 for a good airbrush. Although you can get a starter airbrush for about $40.
So if you're wanting to paint miniatures just as a small thing to do, like
As a small thing to do, I would definitely, I'd probably go for the $50 to $75 range for the compressor, and then probably about a $70 to $100 range for the airbrush, mainly because airbrushes, they last really well, they wear really well, and the parts are easy to get. And the parts themselves, the parts that wear out, are pretty cheap. It's just the actual first investment. And really, when you get the higher quality airbrush, like say I started out with a $15 airbrush, and there are certain things I could not do with that airbrush. Like there's line, I couldn't get super small detail, and I couldn't get consistency because the trigger mechanism wasn't tight enough that I could get a constant line. So you will see a difference, but if you're just using it super casually, then you wouldn't want to get more than $100.
I know in commercial situations, sometimes there are tanks that you have with your compressor where you compress the air of the tank, and then you can bleed that off. Do you know if people in hobby painting do that at all?
People in hobby painting do that a lot. One, because it cuts down on noise, because you compress about 3 liters of air, and then that usually lasts an entire painting session, and you don't hear anything. And you can say if you're going to paint something in the middle of the night, you can run it during the day, it's all compressed, and then you can use it in the night. Some people actually go so far as to get actual tanks of compressed CO2 or air, and you can actually get adapters that will put a regulator on it to allow you to push that through an airbrush just like this. And that's completely silent. The only problem is that you have to find a store that will sell you a tank and that will refill those tanks. And the cost does ramp up over time, and just how much you value silence.
how loud is the compressor?
Well, this compressor is about 60 decibels.
Loud. Do you want to plug it in and
So I can
next?
plug it in, and I can see it's. Is it on right now? It is. That's about how loud it gets. Right now, since I have it,
It's not on.
it's not tight. So right now it's tight, and so I was thinking, and it has to keep up because it doesn't have a tank. It has to keep up a little bit every once in a while. But like if I'm spraying constantly, it's going to be going on a lot more. You can put these on the ground because this hose is quite long. You can put these on the ground. If you put it on like a carpet, then it'll dampen some of the noise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good.
Very good.